Hey guys, Modelling Weekly here, coming with my first video of 2023. I hope you've all had a fantastic start to the year so far. Today I'll be fully building, painting and weathering Airfix's newly released Gloster Meteor F.8 in 72nd scale, which was a mixed bag of a kit, so let's get straight into looking at some of the parts as well as the box contents. Enjoy! Included in the box is a bog standard array of Airfix contents, including the plastic parts all wrapped up into a single bag, with the clear parts packed separately. The kit parts themselves are super standard from Airfix. Fairly nicely recessed details are present, with various raised elements and panel lines that are arguably slightly large in some places, though this shouldn't cause any massive issues. One aspect that I was slightly disappointed to see were some light scratches on some of the wing parts included in the kit. I'm not sure if these were a result of contact between parts during transit, or if they were present from the moulding process, but they were there for me and had to be dealt with using some fine sandpaper. The nicest part of the kit in terms of detail is probably the cockpit, with some really nice switches and control lines on the side walls. This should look really good once painted up with a bit of weathering. Overall, not incredible, but not terrible either. In terms of clear parts, these all look really nice to me, and I particularly like the slightly frosted area that can be seen on areas where paint should be applied. A very nice little touch there. The decals in this kit, as per usual, are printed by Cartograph, so there's not much more really to say. They're incredibly well registered, and from past experience they should take to the surface with no problems at all. Before we get into the build segment, I'd just like to quickly say a massive thank you to all my channel members here on YouTube. Your continued support is truly invaluable and helps to keep the channel running. If you'd like to find out more about channel memberships, feel free to click that join button down below for more info. I've recently added a basic member tier, so please check it out if you're interested. Thank you all so much again, and let's get back into the video. Construction of course started in the cockpit with this build. The first few steps involve constructing the walls of the cockpit tub, along with adding some extra components such as the pilot's seat. The fit at this stage was pretty average. I didn't have any big problems, though a couple of parts needed a bit of persuading to get into place. This process was aided by adding a touch of extra thin cement when squeezing them in. The first painting stage was to add a basic coat of superfine silver, as I intended to add some nice chips and scratches to the cockpit using chipping fluid later on. I didn't use a primer coat here as I didn't really need the silver to be particularly metallic. Next up was a coat of X35 satin varnish to seal in the silver, followed by a coat of Humbrol chipping fluid as I was given it to try out. From my experience, it worked out perfectly fine and was very comparable to the ammo alternative. With this laid down, a coat of XF1 flat black acted as the final cockpit colour of choice. Once the black had dried, a stiff, short, bristled brush was soaked in some tap water, and I got to work with some chipping. What I often find when using chipping fluid is that you always want to give the water time to soak in at first, and to make sure that the new water is added to the surface regularly to prevent it drying up. This way, it's always soaked and will be much easier to chip, and using a toothpick can also be a great way to achieve some finer chips. Model colour 70.876 was then used to paint the seat cushions. At this step, the instructions suggest the use of a medium blue tone, however I found a huge amount of documentation to suggest that the light brown seat cushions were also prevalent in the F8. As I preferred the look of this, I went with this option. Some basic seatbelts were also added using some thinly cut masking tape strips. A nice rich red tone was then used to paint the ejector seat handle, which really made it pop. With the seat now finished, it could be squeezed into the cockpit tub and glued into place. Just about. A nice dark brown Tamiya pin wash really helped to accentuate some of those details on the seat, as well as creating some pretty nice dirt effects on the floor. However, it wasn't a massive help against the rest of the black cockpit interior. It's time to be blunt, unfortunately, because the instrument panel decal in this kit was far too large for the actual part, so I'd definitely recommend making use of the instrument panel details and painting it yourself, or getting hold of a photo etch fret. It's very important at this stage to put some weight in the nose of the aircraft, as this one is definitely prone to being a tail-sitter with the forwards mounted tricycle landing gear that it features. I believe the instructions suggest 8 grams of weight to be used. The fit of the fuselage halves was actually superb, with no serious gaps at all. As a result, I simply applied a thin layer of rubberized CA glue over the joins, which would help in eliminating any small irregularities such as areas of slight sinkage. In an effort to add a touch more surface detail to the model, I employed the use of a homemade rivet tool to add some rivet lines along some of the panel lines on the fuselage and wings. I couldn't, however, find any reliable documentation on the positions of the rest of the rivets, so I had to keep them limited along the panel lines themselves. Now onto the construction of the wings. This was a fairly trouble-free process, though there were a few parts that had to be cut down or sanded to fit properly. The most prevalent of which were the air intake and exhaust nozzles. These did go into place pretty easily, though steps were created between their edges and the rest of the engine nacelles, so a lot of sanding and reshaping was required to get rid of this issue. Though even then there were some places that weren't completely perfect. This could just be me, however, so let me know in the comments if you had the same issues. A touch more riveting at this stage really made the wings pop a little more. I was pleased to see that the join between the fuselage and the wings was excellent, which was a really nice relief after the trouble I had putting the wing sections together. Superfine silver was again used for the forward and main gear bays, sprayed directly onto the plastic once again, as they weren't going to be manipulated massively in terms of effects and weathering. With everything all masked up and ready to go, the first stage of the painting process involved spraying the outside of the canopy glass with black. As I wasn't using interior masks, this was an essential step in ensuring that the inside of the canopy would be the correct colour. Mr. Mahogany Surfacer was used as the main primer for this build, as at the time I didn't have any 1500 black, which would have been my primer of choice. It was thinned down with roughly 60% MLT and sprayed through my Harder & Steenbeck Ultra at 20 psi. As the underside of my scheme of choice would be silver, the next step was a gloss black coat on the lower surfaces of the aircraft. This helps in making the silver pop, which wasn't strictly necessary earlier in the wheel wells and the cockpit. The difference in shine between the wheel wells and silver underside will also help to separate them from one another visually. With the black dry, on goes the superfine silver yet again. You can really see the difference that black makes to the surface. It was sprayed fairly quickly, and I made sure not to go over the areas I'd already sprayed too much, as this kind of ruins the super metallic effect that the black base provides. Some panels were then masked off and sprayed with titanium just to add a bit of subtle interest to the underside. The variation on the underside was pushed even further with the use of ammo shaders to make some of those leading edges pop and to simulate the buildup of dirt and grime. Time to get those top surfaces prepared for camo. As I'd very stupidly ran out of white paint at the time of painting this aircraft, I made use of Tamiya Sky Grey to add some basic mottling and pre-shading to the surfaces in question. I'll be adding quite a bit of post-shading later on, so this wasn't a massively important step. Mr. Colour C13 was then laid down, forming the grey elements of the two-tone RAF camo. I made sure to spray this incredibly lightly and carefully in order to only partially obscure the pre-shading coat beneath it. I also made a conscious effort to thin the paint slightly more than usual, adding to the translucency of the paint layer on top. All the topside paintwork on this build was carried out using my Hydra and Steenbeck Infinity with a 0.15mm needle. A mottling stencil was used to initiate the post-shading process, which created a nice bit of variation that increased the overall interest of the paint scheme. Sky Grey was added to the original C13 colour to lighten it for this stage. The green areas of the camouflage were a bit of a screw up from my end, as I originally started spraying NATO green in order to create this tone. However, I realised afterwards that I'd gone for a far darker and richer green than I should have. As a result, I resprayed with Tamiya Olive Drab off camera. The same mottling processes were then carried out once again, except this time making use of a lightened olive drab instead of the previous grey tone. I also did a bit of manual post shading in an effort to further accentuate this layer. As AK masking putty was used for this camo painting process, it could simply be peeled off once the job was done. GX100 thinned with Mr. Leveling Thinner was used to seal the paintwork once it was complete, ready for a spot of decal application. As per usual, the decals are applied using a combination of microset and sol, which are more than powerful enough when it comes to applying cartograph decals. These things practically sink into the surface detail without any softening solution at all, which results in an extra beautiful finish once that microsol is added on top. X35 satin varnish was used as a nice preparation coat for the weathering stages, as it provides a nice balance between blendability and smoothness when applying a panel line wash. The panel line wash itself was added using Abteilung 502 sepia, thinned down with generic white spirit, which is perfectly suitable for the large majority of weathering applications. This mixture was simply touched along the panel lines and other surface details, which allowed it to pull itself along them bit by bit using capillary action. Thanks to the layer of satin varnish, a dry paper towel was then more than sufficient in removing the excess wash on the surface of the model. Build-ups of dirt along some of the panel lines and surface details were then imitated using the same sepia oil paint, except this time it was far less dilute than in the wash and was blended rather than rubbed away. This blending was done by a combination of a white spirit dampened brush as well as a soft, dry blending brush. As mentioned previously, some oil leaks and stains were added through the use of a soft bristled brush and no white spirit. This fuel leak is a good example of this. The oil paint in question here was Abteilung 502 Smoke. When it came to chipping, I wanted to imitate damage to the paint that hadn't quite gone through to the underlying aluminium, but had damaged the top coat ever so slightly. In order to achieve this, I simply mixed some light grey and light green tones using Bieco acrylics, applied them with a fine brush. This effect also doesn't stand out as much as with plain silver chips, which helps to bring the model together more effectively. I decided to assemble the landing gear off camera as it actually took quite a while to get right. A couple of the parts in my kit were slightly deformed, so this, combined with the average fit to begin with, required the use of filler and sanding to get right. Ammo dust wash was applied to the landing gear and blended in with white spirit just to help combine the unweathered wheels with the weathered aircraft. This was also assisted with the use of a smoke pin wash. The last few parts, including the main canopy section, were then masked up and sprayed their respective colours. With the pitot tube added, I called the kit complete. All things considered, it was actually quite a fun build to get stuck into. It's by no means a bad kit at all. There were, however, some areas where the fit was lacking, which sucked up far more time than I would have wanted on such a small model. The primary areas of interest included the assembly of the wings themselves, along with the landing gear legs, which really put up a fight. In addition to this, the scratches and other minor moulding defects were slightly discouraging to see on a 2022 tool kit, which is essentially down to poor quality control. Again, however, as I said before, this is not a terrible kit at all. With some time and patience, it can very easily be turned into a nice looking little model. In terms of how I handled the build, I'd say it came out alright, if not little lacking in terms of variation in the two primary camo colours. I'd definitely make those pop with some lighter post shading tones if I ever built the kit again. I'll be interested to hear what you guys think down below. Well, that's pretty much it from me today. If you did enjoy the video, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe if you're new, as it really helps to grow the channel and reach more modelers. Make sure to stay tuned for the next video, and I'll see you guys then. Bye!